from Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, and everything on down. What about the children? Mrs. Coyle asked. Did this woman, this informant, say anything about Ethan and Zoe? I'm sorry, ma'am, but no, Burns told her. What we received was a list of targets, something that quite honestly sounded improbable until about 15 minutes ago. Go on, Coyle told him. What kind of targets are we talking about here? All humans, sir, Burns said. It's a list of 18 names. Vice President Flynn is at the top, with Secretary Ribellini from Homeland Security at number 18. Oh, Jesus. Coyle had heard everything he needed to know. Tell me Martin Cho wasn't on that list. I'm afraid so. Right below the Speaker of the House and the President pro tempore of the Senate. So in other words, the President said slowly. That's right, sir, Burns affirmed. We're talking about the entire line of succession to the presidency. Chapter 59. Norma Teifel, the counterterrorism advisor, spoke next. Everyone on that list will be receiving a full protective detail in addition to whatever security service they already have. That means dedicated intelligence agents, CAT teams on standby, also advance and transportation, although we're hoping to keep travel to a minimum. They can't shut down our goddamn government, the President shouted at Teifel. That's exactly what they want, and exactly why I came back to Washington. Do you know what kind of flack they gave Bush for being in the air on 9/11? That wasn't his call, sir. I'm aware it wasn't his fault, Teifel said as diplomatically as she could. Yes, exactly. I'm sure it wasn't his fault, Coyle said. It was all this programmed movement he hated. The sense of traveling through the world not as one person but as 5, 6, 10, and 20 at a time. That was the real weight of the presidency. For the time being, sir, Teifel said, it is best for you to keep out of sight. Again, the President grumbled and turned in his seat, away from all the unwanted advice. Archie, where are we going? He called back. Agent Walsh, the head of the President's protective detail, stood up in a small passageway between them and the pilot. Andrews, sir. Air Force One is on standby. And then? Walsh stayed where he was, but was mute, awkwardly not answering the question. It wasn't for Burns or Teifel's ears at this point. Never mind, God damn it, the President barked. He could feel Regina's hand on his own, gentle and firm at the same time. When he looked at her, she seemed to be holding it all together by a sheer act of will. He owed her the same self-control. Actually, he owed it to his advisors as well. They were in danger now, too. What about Cho's family? He asked. We've got agents on the ground in Bethesda and Oakland, Burns told him. They'll have a full security detail within the hour, Mrs. Cho, both of their sons, and Secretary Cho's mother. I'll want to speak with Lottie directly. Of course, sir. We'll also have the Joint Chiefs in a video conference once we're away, Teifel said. And after that, the same CIA work group as before, if you care to sit in. It might be a good idea. Of course it's a good idea, said the President. That's the group with Alex Cross, isn't it? Mrs. Coyle asked. Yes, ma'am, Burns anticipated her next question. He won't be asked to change focus. Good, she said. Thank you. It was no secret by now that the First Lady had handpicked the well-known police detective for the kidnap investigation. Nobody was going to tell her no on that one. The world's watching us, Ron, the President said, especially our country's enemies. We need to get this in hand once and for all. I want hourly reports and I want a briefing on a full range of options. Do you understand? Yes, Mr. President, completely. We all do. I mean a full range. Of course, sir. I'm not going to fuck around with this anymore. Ed, the First Lady slid a hand up her husband's arm. Sorry, he said. Sorry, but this ends here, now. Whatever it takes. The President sat back. Out the window he could see one of 4 other identical choppers flying alongside. A standard protocol to reduce the risks from a possible ground attack. Anything seemed possible right now. Their departure from the White House had gone smoothly enough. Now the convoy headed southeast towards Andrews, 11 miles away. After that, Edward O. Coyle, the most powerful man in the world, had no idea what to expect. Hell, he could be dead in the next few minutes. The unthinkable was no longer unthinkable.
Chapter 60. CIA headquarters was lit up like a fluorescent box when I got there late that night. The powers that be had decided to share what they knew with our de facto advisory board. What they told us was a mind-blower. An unnamed informant was claiming the entire line of succession to the presidency as Al-Aila's new target list. Secretary of State Cho's murder was a testimony to how seriously we needed to take this new threat. The symbolism of the day's attack was devastating to all of us. Not only did Cho represent the United States to the world, but Al-Aila was clearly using this incident as their foray onto the international stage. Statements claiming responsibility had come in through Al Jazeera, indicating the organization by name for the first time. Every news outlet from Jakarta to Madison, Wisconsin had picked up the story. Al-Aila, it seemed, was ready for its close-up. What was worse, so far they were winning. Today they got us by surprise, Evan Stroud told the assembled 24 people at headquarters. That's not going to happen again, not to anyone on that wish list of theirs. Is there any thought about leaking back that we've got this informant? One of the Bureau ADs asked. Maybe to put a wedge inside the organization, do a little dividing and conquering? I'm afraid they're already dividing. Andrew Fatani, the analyst based in Saudi Arabia, stood up to speak. It was Fatani who had done most of the talking so far that night, breaking down what they knew about Al-Aila from the Riyadh office. These newer organizations are more adaptable and flexible than anything we've seen before, he told us. It's entirely possible, I'd say probable, that Al-Aila's already handed off some measure of control to their Washington operatives. The faster they can create these self-directed cells, the harder it is to penetrate the larger organization. In fact, it may already be too late. Too late for what? I asked Fatani. To ever know who Al-Aila really is. Our best recommendation is to focus on finding the local leadership and, of course, whoever they're talking to. But we have to move carefully. If we take out an individual cell, it's like tearing the limb off a starfish. The organization simply moves on and grows another limb. Hang on a second, Peter Lindley interjected. Are you saying we shouldn't bring down these people because if they stay on the loose, they might lead us up the ladder? I don't think I can live with that, and I don't think the president can either. Fatani blinked back his frustration. He was sick and tired, just like everyone else. I'm saying, and excuse me for stating the obvious, that you need to be aware of what you're losing when you do bring them down. One of the flat-topped NSA guys grunted out his own annoyance. I say we find the sons of bitches and interrogate the shit out of them, he said. Use the Patriot Act. Send asses to Egypt if we have to. Our priority should be saving American lives. It's that simple. At least it should be. Fatani put his hands up. He'd made Riyadh's opinion clear on the matter. The decision about what to do with it wasn't up to him. We'll take all of this under advisement with the president, Stroud said, trying to cut through the tension. Not that anyone could right now. This crisis was a fire that had to be put out. Period. Anything short of that was no option at all. Meanwhile, the fire raged on, and it almost seemed out of control. Chapter 61. Ned Mahoney and I trudged out of CIA headquarters around 2 o'clock that morning. I felt like we were leaving a cocoon, which we kind of were, but not a warm and cozy one. The president had come on the line at midnight, 10 hours after the bombing of Cho's motorcade. In the morning, he'd make an emotional national address, condemning the attack and calling on America to remember the victims for everything they'd stood for against murderers exactly like these. I think I liked it better when I was out of the loop, I said. It was hard not to feel overwhelmed. My intention was to be back at Braniff as soon as possible, but there were a lot of other places I felt like I could and probably should be. Surveillance was about to make a quantum leap in D.C. Government affidavits were being written through the night, and several new Title III warrants were expected to go through as early as the following afternoon. That meant listening teams in all kinds of places they hadn't been before. More mosques, more online networks, more phone lines, all of it. The personnel demands alone were going to be unprecedented. Where are you going to be? I asked Ned. Quantico. Unless hostage and rescue has to move, he said. But I'll be putting in some surveillance time too. Your phone going to be on? Only at lunch and study hall, I deadpanned. I'll call you if there's anything to tell, he said. Okay, I'll do the same. We hadn't talked about it specifically, but Ned and I seemed to have fallen into an agreement. I'd have his back on this and he'd have mine. Before we got to the parking lot, he stopped and put a hand on my shoulder. It's good to be on the same side, he said. I know I pissed you off for a while there, but it won't happen again. That's a promise. Is this where we cut open our thumbs and shake? I said, triple dog swear or whatever. Ned didn't miss a beat. I'll pass, he said. I don't know where that thumb's been. He grinned at me before he turned and started across the lawn toward his car. But I will return your calls from now on.
Chapter 62. The kidnapper always carried the little tape recorder with him on these pleasant hikes through the woods. You never knew when inspiration was going to strike, and it was good to capture the details when they were fresh. Record.
The first mile or so is just a little hilly. I can cover that stretch fast enough. Eventually it starts to get pretty steep up toward the ridge. That's where I lose a little time, but I'm getting better at the climb. Theoretically, I could drive in from the other side, but that's only going to happen once. By the time you're done reading this, you'll understand why. Meanwhile, I hike in the long way. Hell, maybe I'll even lose some weight in the bargain. You can appreciate the efficiency in that, can't you?
Stop. The book was coming along well. It was practically writing itself these days. Anyone with a pulse could tell you this was a huge story, even bigger than he thought it was going to be at first. Interesting times, these. He pocketed the recorder again and traded it for the recurve bow on his shoulder. The ground was getting scrubbier. It didn't usually take long to spook something around here. He loaded an arrow while he walked and started kicking at the bushes, watching for prey, any movement at all. Sure enough, just past the crest of the first hill, an eastern cottontail darted out. It came right at him. God bless its tiny little brain, but then turned and bolted off in the other direction. He let it get a good head start. Anything less than 20 yards was just fish in a barrel. But then he raised the bow, drew back to the corner of his mouth, and let it fly. The cottontail stumbled hard, ass over whiskers. It came to a stop in some tall grass and was still quivering when he got there. A quick snap of the neck finished it off. It took only a minute after that to truss it up with some twine, and he was moving again. Going faster now, he jogged down the next slope and across a small ravine. It took another 20 minutes to climb back up to the other side, where he stopped just before a line of giant spruce growing along the ridge. Record.
You'd never know it to look at these trees now, but they probably marked a property line at some point, back when this was dairy country and not woods. Now it's just our own little home away from home. It can't compete with the White House, of course, but lucky for me, it doesn't have to.
Stop. He stood among the trees for several minutes, scanning the area down below. After he'd satisfied himself that it was safe to move out into the open, he broke through the line of evergreens and started down into the hollow, where the old farmstead sat moldering away to nothing. Chapter 63. The fencing was long gone. The whole back half of the old house was sagging right into itself, almost like it was taking a final bow. And the driveway, what used to be the driveway, was just a long patch of goldenrod and buckthorn with two ruts in the ground you couldn't even see from a distance. The barn was still standing, though, more or less. Thick brush and vines had made the back of the place nearly impenetrable. In front, someone had torn off the big double doors a long time ago, and the flap to the hayloft above that. With a few pieces of missing siding near the peak, the whole thing looked like a face with black gaps for orifices. He always thought of the entrance as the mouth. Just inside, he untrussed the fat little rabbit and let it roll out onto the floor right next to the last one. From his pack, he took a plastic travel container of granular lye and a small Poland Spring bottle he'd filled up from the tap at home. He sprinkled both over the animal. The lye sped up the breakdown of tissue, and the water sped up the lye. It was an old farm trick and a half-decent little insurance policy, too. Nothing said keep